It's great to see everybody tonight. I'm glad you came out. I have three pieces I'm going to read, and the first one, one little bit of information that might help you kind of get the story better is for those of you who are not really keen on your Ethiopian history. In 1935, the Italians got into a bit of a war and sort of invaded Ethiopia and took over, and they held it until around 1941. So, this story is called A Leader of Men, and it's set in Ethiopia in 1939. 6-year-old Osman and his family left their homeland in the eastern desert with a caravan of donkeys and camels carrying all their worldly goods. They climbed a winding rocky path towards the uplands, and after much hard traveling, they arrived just 3 days ago, hot, tired, and thirsty at their destination, a green river town. As his father had promised, the town had great buildings and many people and wonders around every corner. These marvels surpassed anything Osman had seen before: the birthing of a camel, the slaughter of a goat. In a flat field between two streets, he now played a game with a dozen small boys. Barefoot and shirtless, they chased a ball, high voices chittering like birds, skinny arms pumping as they ran. The ball flew in an arc ahead of the pack, bounced twice and rolled forward. Osman raced to it and drew back his leg to kick. A kid shouldered into him from behind, knocking him to the ground. The other team howled with taunts and laughter. Sitting on the hard dirt, Osman rubbed his throbbing knee and fought to hold back the tears pooling in his eyes. He remembered the time he couldn't breathe when he was the kid on the bottom of the pile after all the others had jumped on top. He would show these kids who pushed him down, show them all, yes he would. He willed himself to stand. Dusting off his bottom, he heard a rumbling sound and looked to find its source. A rolling metal machine he had learned just yesterday to call an auto. Since coming to the big town, he had seen 2, now 3 autos. Someday he would drive one. He would sound the horn and it would be loud, and every time he saw someone, he'd make 2 long blasts, honk, honk, and when they'd jump, he'd laugh. The auto passed, and in its window, Osman saw a girl about his age, looking at him, grinning. Her front teeth were missing. She had great soft eyes, and as she waved her little hand, blood rushed to his face. He turned away and trotted back to the jostling boys. Up and down the field they ran, chasing the ball, pushing each other, elbows flying. One of the boys saw something in the distance. He raised his hand, his finger pointing up the road to the garrison, the fortress that Osman's father had warned him never to go near. The heavy gate of iron-studded timbers closed behind a lone figure on a black horse. The mount's coat shimmered in the early morning sun, rippling with muscles. It looked nothing like the dusty, stick-ribbed donkeys Osman knew so well. All the boys gawked. One muttered, "The Colonel." Osman had heard much talk of the Italians, the invaders, and he'd even seen a buzzing spot in the sky that his oldest brother called an airplane. But here was the Colonel. He rode like a king, his back straight, his high black boots in the metal stirrups, his uniform so clean and perfect. "Father says they're animals," one boy said. "Dirty," another grumbled and spat. The smallest boy squeaked, "They're dirty, dirty doggies," and the others looked down on him. The boy sputtered, "Daddy says that," then dropped to all fours and wagged his head, barking, "Woof, woof, woof." The bigger boys scowled, Osman too, and one of them slapped the kid's butt with his foot. Just then one of the boys called out, "He's coming!" Their eyes shot to the colonel, and they yelled and scampered off to resume the game, all but Osman, who stood transfixed. He began walking on a course to intersect the rider's path, and with each step he saw something new. The bit in the horse's mouth, the black-gloved hands gripping the reins while holding a thin, hard riding crop, the long sword swinging at the Italian's side, and the leather holster on his belt, the mustache, his visored cap with its silver emblem, how his shaded eyes stared to the horizon. The colonel dropped one hand to his sword and drew it from its metal scabbard, making a scratching sound. He thrust the gleaming blade before him, angled upward, a leader of men. Osman broke into a run. When he got to the spot where the horse would pass, he stopped, panting hard. The colonel approached, looming ever larger, finer, fiercer, riding impossibly high above the dust. The hoofbeats shook the ground. The horse's huge head bobbed. Its nostrils flared and snorted. A gust of hot, wet breath blew across Osman's face. The Italian now eclipsed the sun, leaving the open-mouthed boy in shadow, staring up at the silhouette, all square shoulders, peaked cap, and jutting jaw. He is like no other, this Italian, the colonel, like no man in all the earth. And his beast, a giant that could rise up on his great haunches, pawing the air with his forelegs. Yes, he could rise up, and out of his body would come wings, long, black, shiny wings, and he could beat them. He could beat them. Yes, he would. He would beat them, and the mighty horse would fly. Osman heard cheers. The colonel rode past, his shoulders so broad, his horse's black tail twitching, then rounded a corner and he was gone. Osman heard cheers on the field and turned to see the other team, fists in the air, celebrating a point scored. Players on his team waved and called out for him to rejoin them. Osman thrust his shoulders back and marched forward. He was ready, yes he was, ready to lead his boys to victory. Public speaking is not my strong point. As was mentioned in the introduction, thank you very much, I worked at the U of O for quite a while, and freelance, and part of that work is talked about in this story, and I wanted to read it tonight because as I was going through things, thinking about what to read, this comes from a very particular time, and I thought everybody might kind of relate to it in some way. This is called Reign of Terror, and R-A-I-N. Weaponized anthrax kills hundreds in UO terror attack. That's the headline I secretly feared when I heard in November 2001 that the Eugene Fire Department's hazardous material team was racing to campus in response to an envelope sent to the physics department office. When opened, it had sent a cloud of white powder billowing into the air. One worker who had direct contact with the powder was now at McKinsey-Willamette Hospital. The letter postmarked from Malaysia contained the words, "Death to the oppressor." I guess the one thing I forgot to mention is that this is in the nonfiction category. So. This horrifying news played on all the fear and paranoia and helplessness and sorrow and grief that had punched the country woozy that fall. First 9/11, and then, like the second blow of a deadly 1-2 combination, anthrax. While the fallen Twin Towers still smoldered, these letter-borne attacks on media outlets and the United States Senate killed 5, infected more than 20, and added bioterror to the rapidly expanding vocabulary of fear. Local TV, and newspaper reporters would soon be swarming to campus. The university's Office of Communications, where I worked, revved into crisis mode. The staff gathered and divvied up pressing tasks. Get the facts, inform administrators, get ahead of the inevitable rumors by quickly drafting and disseminating to media the official university statement, start work on a detailed press release. My assignment, staff the emergency scene. An invisible mist darkened the streets in the dwindling late afternoon light. I opened my umbrella and looked down 13th Street toward Willamette Hall, where flashing colored lights throbbed on top of half a dozen squad cars and fire department vehicles. Yellow police tape cordoned off the street. Officers kept bystanders at a safe distance from the evacuated building. A flash of my ID got me inside the restricted area. Radios crackled and emergency personnel scurried about, their jaws set, faces determined. An unmistakable fear hung in the air that if this thing goes south, if it is anthrax, if it got into the building's air conditioning system before anyone realized the danger, things could get very ugly. I got close to Willamette and through a brightly lit window could see someone in a head-to-toe hazmat contamination control suit moving with the lumbering stiffness of an astronaut on the moon. I found one of our public safety guys and got briefed and called in an update to the office. My colleagues there were already working on the press release. UO, City, FBI respond to mail scare at university. It would quote Vice President for Administration Dan Williams, "We are hoping that testing will show that this is only a hoax." And hoping too, as I think we all were, that we could go back to September 10th, back to simpler days when the headlines we'd put atop November press releases would read, "Holiday tuba concert scheduled," and "Dining hall to celebrate Thanksgiving with tofu and turkey." But not now. The Opie and Andy headlines were gone. The carnage was no longer distant, on TV, back east. In that surreal twilight, with strobing emergency lights flashing, it felt as if evil had our number, knew where we lived, and for the price of a postage stamp could be delivered right through the mail slot. I didn't know what to do, but I had to do something. The opportunity came soon after the emergency vehicles left, propelled by some sense of having been attacked, some primal impulse to protect the tribe. I pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the cavernous, echoing space of the building's empty atrium. With the ventilation system shut down, the air felt hot and heavy. Eyes darting, ears straining on high alert, I scouted the perimeter, not sure what I was looking for, but compelled, vigilant. Then it hit me like a cold, sobering slap. The guy had on a moon suit. They sounded all clear, but they don't know for sure. They could be wrong. I imagined microbes floating in the air, my death one unlucky breath away. Get out! I ran to the door I had entered, pushed it closed behind me, and leaned my weight against the glass as if to keep some snarling genie bottled up. Another shuddering wave of fear, still too close, sent me scurrying into the night. At some distance from Willamette, I rested against a pole of a streetlight, my chest heaving, heart hammering. I unfurled my umbrella. Just above my head, the now heavy rain thrummed on the thin, stretched nylon. Light shimmered in the raindrops, illuminating them as they angled down like silver slivers. My breathing slowed. I grew uncomfortably aware of the tight, dry cylinder in which I stood, and just beyond that fragile shelter, and unimaginable darkness. And I had the pleasure of working at the U of O for a long time. I worked with some really great people, and without that time, I wouldn't have been able to write the next piece that I'm going to read. One bit of information that would probably be useful for you to know is that the person that this thing is written about has a book written, and the title of that book is The Grazing Revolution, A Radical Plan to Save the Earth. The title of the piece is Elephant Man. What if global warming wasn't the frightening, intractable problem we all know it to be? What if someone could wave a magic wand and make it all go away? Like hope incarnate, that someone walks onto the stage at a TED conference in the form of Alan Savory, a fit, silver-haired, white Zimbabwean in a button-down Oxford shirt. He's a dignified son of the British Empire whose seriousness is surpassed only by his sincerity. And when he says methane, you know he's a lot smarter than you are. He lays out a captivating story about the Earth's expanding deserts and how they can be transformed into verdant productivity. The revitalized tracts of plant-covered land will halt climate change as they remove vast amounts of carbon from the atmosphere and, as Savory explains, safely store it in grassland soils for thousands of years. This low-cost, low-tech fix is not a Band-Aid, not some stopgap ploy to stave off catastrophe for another couple of decades until we hope, we dream, we pray, technology bails us out. No, this plan promises far more. It will take levels of atmospheric carbon back to pre-industrial levels. For ecologists and planetary scientists, as well as for parents worrying about the world into which they've brought children, this is the Holy Grail, a ticket back to Eden. TED Materials hail Savory's ideas as surprising, striking and controversial, and a significant breakthrough. The most unexpected and staggering moment in Savory's talk comes when he takes personal responsibility for the mass slaughter of African elephants. In the 1950s, young Savory, having earned an undergraduate degree in botany and zoology at the University of Natal in southern Africa, worked in the game department of the Colonial Service. One of his jobs in what was then Northern Rhodesia was to remove the hunting, drum-beating people from their land in an effort to protect the animals that would populate future game preserves. But banishing the pesky drumbeaters had an unintended consequence. The grasslands began to die. Damn, damn, damn. And who's to blame? Savory's suspicions turned to the area's roving herds of elephants. In short order, his research proved, that's the word he likes to use, proved it was the bloody pachyderms that were stomping the vigorous veld into desert. He recommended to his superiors that the elephants be, shall we say, removed. The plan was so extreme, such political dynamite, that the government assembled a panel of experts to review and evaluate it. This brain trust sharpened their pencils, made their calculations, and duly deemed the plan jolly good. Teams of rifle-toting hunters soon fanned out into the bush, tracking down their quarries and chambering their large caliber cartridges. Bang! One bugger down. Bang! Another grass-trampling blighter eradicated. After years of slaughter, the list of the dead numbered 40,000. In his talk, Savory expresses great remorse for this little boo-boo, 18 words of heartfelt contrition, before galloping on to expand his next surefire, well-researched plan to prove how it will be the world's salvation. Wait a minute. African elephants are incredible animals, the largest on dry land, 12 feet tall, weighing 12,000 pounds, intelligent and empathic, tool users who grieve and mourn their dead. When we are confronted by horror on an unimaginable scale, sometimes something in our human makeup abstracts the tragedy, allowing us the succor of cool detachment. Let me see, was 10,000 the number of blankets sent for tsunami relief or the number of people dead? Paradoxically, by focusing on a single victim, we can gain a deeper, more compassionate understanding not only of that individual, but also of the vastly greater atrocity. George Orwell's essay, Shooting an Elephant, recounts a colonial police officer in Raj-era Burma tasked with killing a misbehaving bull elephant. The officer fired a shot into the behemoth's head, but it was only enough to drop him to his knees. At the second shot, he did not collapse, but climbed with desperate slowness to his feet and stood weakly upright, with legs sagging and head drooping. I fired a third time. You could see the agony of it jolt his whole body and knock the last remnant of strength from his legs. The elephant collapses, shaking the ground, his rhythmic breathing coming in long, rattling gasps. The officer fires again. The thick blood welled out of him like red velvet, but still he did not die. I poured shot after shot into his heart and down his throat. They seemed to make no impression. The tortured gasps continued as steadily as the ticking of a clock. The shooter can endure the cruelty no longer and flees in disgust. I heard later that it took him half an hour to die. That kind of carnage 40,000 times. The blood of each great beast dripping red from Alan Savory's hands. When a radio interviewer asked Savory, "Are you as sure of your grazing thesis as you are sure that you were wrong about the elephants? Are you that sure that you are right about this?" Savory responded, "I would stake my life on it." And surely Bwana would not miscalculate this time like Bwana miscalculated before. Rather than using his TED Talk to broaden the urgently important conversation about climate change to include all possible solutions, Savory, who routinely castigates mainstream science for being reductionist, reduces the discussion by saying of his own plan, "There is only one option. I repeat to you, only one option left to climatologists and scientists. There is no other alternative left to mankind. My way or the highway." He comes across in another interview like an Old Testament prophet with a megalomania problem. These floods and this flood damage will just get worse and worse and worse, and the deserts will just keep advancing until somebody someday finally understands what I'm saying. He seems to like how he looks in the robes of the misguided genius, possibly those of the martyr. We used to burn people at the stake for coming up with truly original work, and, tragically, one way or another, throughout my life, I've tended to think ahead and come up with stuff that to me seems common sense, but to others people seems way out and threatening. Humble is not a word to associate with Alan Savory. But successful is. Less than a month after his talk, 500,000 people had watched his video at TED.com. That surge of interest has continued unabated since his talk. Even though it was delivered more than 6 years ago, it still attracts a huge audience, on an average more than 2,700 people per day. As of this morning, the total number of viewers has surpassed 6.4 million. Savory imagines himself a seer, a visionary who, if only he were listened to, could save the world. Perhaps the most telling of his oracular insights, the one we should listen to, is this: the information that fits our beliefs we see very quickly and easily. The data which does not fit our beliefs is almost invisible to us.